So you mentioned wanting to explore Sufism a little more deeply.
Yeah, it's been on my mind.
Well, perfect timing, because
Yeah.
we're diving deep today into this fascinating excerpt on Sufism. It's from Sufism, The Mystical Path in Islam Concepts, Practices, and Controversies.
Oh, interesting. A lot to unpack there.
A lot to unpack. And,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping we can, shed some light on some of these key concepts and practices, but also, some of the controversies surrounding Sufism as well.
Yeah, I think getting into those controversies can help us understand the nuances a little bit better. It's not a monolithic thing, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So the source defines Sufism, or tasawwuf, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, as a mystical spiritual path in Islam that emphasizes a personal connection with the divine.
Right. And that emphasis on the personal connection is really, really important.
It is. And I think, that's kind of where the mystical part comes in. It's not just about adhering to a set of rules or doctrines.
Exactly. It's about, really cultivating that inner experience of the divine.
Yeah. And it seems like that emphasis on the inner experience is where we get into this whole, body versus soul tension that the source talks about.
Right. And, it's not just unique to Sufism. I mean, this idea that there's a part of us that yearns for something beyond the material world.
Right, exactly.
That wants to connect with something greater than ourselves. That's a pretty universal human longing.
It is. So how does Sufism, how do those practices help kind of address that tension?
Well, the idea is that by purifying the soul, by detaching from worldly desires, we can create space for that divine connection to really flourish. It's about stripping away the distractions so we can experience that unity, that oneness with the divine source.
So it's about kind of stilling the mind, quieting the noise of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And, there are all sorts of practices within Sufism that help facilitate that. Things like meditation, chanting,
Right.
special breathing techniques.
And the source actually mentions two different types, or I guess maybe strands is a better word.
Paths, yeah.
Paths of Sufism, the philosophical and the experiential. Can we break those down a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So philosophical Sufism, as you might imagine, delves into some pretty complex metaphysical concepts.
Okay.
It leans heavily towards the idea of monism, the belief that ultimately only God truly exists.
Okay. So everything else is
an illusion. It's like a cosmic shadow play, right?
Wow. Okay. So that's pretty heady stuff.
It is. It's not for the faint of heart.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And I can see how that would lead to some debate, even within Islam itself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion over the centuries about whether that idea of monism really aligns with, traditional Islamic theology.
Right, right. Okay. So what about the experiential side? What does that focus on?
So if philosophical Sufism is about contemplating these big ideas about the nature of reality, experiential Sufism is about, actually experiencing the divine directly.
Got it. Okay.
So this is where you get into practices that are designed to induce altered states of consciousness. Things like ecstatic rituals, chanting, music, whirling dances, all aimed at purifying the soul and really feeling that divine presence in a very real, visceral way.
So it sounds like almost like a spiritual journey or quest. And the source actually uses that language, the spiritual journey. What does that look like in practice?
Well, imagine it as a path, with distinct stages or stations along the way.
Okay.
And each stage is marked by these deeper insights or mystical unveilings. So you might have, a profound experience of peace during prayer, or feel this overwhelming love for all creation, or even have these visions or dreams that offer guidance.
Wow.
But, it's not always a linear path. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be moments of doubt. And, that's where the guidance of a sheikh comes in.
Right. The source mentions that a sheikh is really important.
Yeah.
So for those of us who don't know, who is a sheikh and what role do they play in this journey?
So a sheikh is essentially a spiritual guide, a mentor, someone who has already walked the path themselves and can help you navigate the twists and turns. It's like having a seasoned climber guiding a novice up a treacherous mountain.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So they provide that kind of wisdom and support. And the source also highlights this practice called ZIKR, which is remembrance. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so ZIKR is all about intentionally bringing God into your awareness. It's about cultivating this constant remembrance of the divine presence.
Okay.
And it can take different forms, It could involve repeating one of God's names or a devotional phrase, either silently to yourself or out loud, or it could be done in a group setting, sometimes with music or rhythmic movements.
It sounds almost like a form of meditation in a way.
Yeah, it definitely has that meditative quality.
Right.
And, it's a practice that's found in many different spiritual traditions.
Right, right. But like any spiritual path, Sufism isn't without its controversies.
Right.
What are some of the issues that have come up around it?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Sufism is incredibly diverse. There are all these different orders and lineages, each with their own interpretations and practices. And so this has sometimes led to, misunderstandings and even criticism, particularly from some of the more orthodox schools of thought within Islam.
Can you give us some specific examples of, what kinds of practices have been maybe particularly controversial?
Yeah, sure. So, some Sufi groups, they engage in these very intense rituals that can seem pretty extreme to outsiders, things like self-flagellation or inducing trance-like states. And, these practices are not meant to be taken lightly. They're often done under the very careful guidance of a sheikh, and they're not, for everyone. And then, you also have some Sufi groups that place a strong emphasis on venerating saints and visiting their tombs, which some people see as bordering on, idolatry.
Right, right. And so there's that fine line there.
Right. Exactly. And, it's important to remember that these practices are not universally accepted within Islam. They've sparked a lot of debate over the centuries.
Yeah. And so it sounds like navigating those complexities requires a lot of wisdom and discernment. What advice does the source offer to, everyday Muslims trying to make sense of it all?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to remember that, unity is paramount.
Okay.
Respecting different interpretations, recognizing that there's not just one right way to practice Islam. And the source really encourages Muslims to focus on their personal relationship with God rather than getting caught up in theological disputes or sectarian divisions.
Right. That seems like pretty sound advice, especially in today's world where, it feels like everyone's arguing and digging in their heels. How do you think this advice might apply to some of the challenges Muslims are facing today?
Well, I think it's a reminder that there's often more that unites us than divides us. Instead of focusing on points of difference, we can choose to emphasize our shared faith and values.
Yeah.
We're all striving for the same thing, to live a life that's pleasing to God. And, this is especially crucial in a time when Muslims are often facing scrutiny and prejudice. We need to stand together, support one another.
So it sounds like Sufism, with its emphasis on this inner experience and that personal connection, really offers a pathway towards greater understanding and unity within the Muslim community.
I think so, yeah. And it's not just for Muslims, right?
All right, exactly.
I mean, anyone can benefit from cultivating that inner connection with the divine, however they understand it.
Wow, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It really has.
We've learned that Sufism is this really rich, multifaceted path within Islam. It emphasizes personal experience. It emphasizes the journey towards the divine. It's rich with these beautiful practices like ZIKR, and yet, it's not without its controversies. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what makes it so interesting and so thought-provoking.
Absolutely.
And so I'll just leave you with this. And this is something that I'm going to be pondering as well, considering that tension between the body and the soul that we've been talking about. How might we all apply this idea of detaching from the material world, from all those distractions, to find greater spiritual fulfillment in our own lives?
It's a great question.
It is a great question. And, maybe the answers are different for everyone.
Yeah.
But it's something worth exploring. So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. And we encourage you to keep exploring.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's so much to learn and there's so much beauty to discover.
Yeah.
See you next time.
See ya.